Hello, my name is John Chodacki, and I'm here as part of the Open Publishing Festival in 2021 as part of a fireside chat series. A colleague of mine, Cameron Nayland, and I have been doing these series at the Open Publishing Fest for the last couple years. Today, my guest is Lars Bjørnshauge from the Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ. Thank you for joining me, Lars. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk today. Just maybe jumping straight in and just talking a little bit about what does it mean to be the managing director of DOAJ? What is that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, nowadays, since DOAJ has grown into a medium-sized organization, I'm not very involved in all the editorial work, but it's more management, human resource issues, and fundraising. Fundraising is, an important issue for DOAJ in the sense that we are crowd-funded, right? So we have several hundred universities and research funders and publishers who are contributing small fees, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of work keeping that up and even develop the fundraising. So, and since I'm about to retire, I'm sort of preparing for the new managing director, and we will probably be able to make an announcement very soon.
Oh, wow.
About this. Yeah.
Well, being a retirement, I guess, how did your career get you to where you are now? What brought you to DOAJ?
I mean, life is full of coincidences. So I at some point I started studying social science and political science at a university. I was quite young, but nevertheless I got children. They should be supported, so I had to find a job. So I started shelving books at the university library. I have shelved books at public libraries before, so that was a way to get a little bit of income. And then I was basically in academic libraries for 30 years. There was no master plan behind all this. One step at a time, and I ended up being in academic libraries for 30 years in Denmark and in Sweden.
And then what brought you to, I know you've worked in many different kind of large organizations focused on advocacy and moving the world towards a more open future. So how did you transition from university librarianship to?
It was during the years where we shifted from printed journals to digital journals. I was involved in actually some of the first big deals for libraries, which was at that point an exciting thing, because suddenly we were able to provide researchers and students with an immense amount of information at their desktops, right? So that was a very interesting period of time. When I started at Lund University in Sweden in the year 2000, we had this development of shifting from print to digital journals. And in Lund in Sweden, there was the science park around or integrated in the university, where you had all these startup companies. And of course, many of the people, of the candidates from the university, went to those companies, got a job, and blah, blah, blah. And they suddenly they realized that they have lost access to those journals, academic journals. And that had a huge impact on their productivity. And of course, those small companies were not set up to pay for access. So some of them came knocking on my door and said, "Yeah, what can we do?" I said, "Yeah, not much actually." But that made me think that, libraries and librarians are put in the world to provide access to information for users, but from the shift from print to digital, a major part of the library's task were to actually to prevent users to access information, users that were not affiliated to the university. And I became somewhat frustrated about that, because the content of the journals that we are licensing are the research in those journals is public funded, right? And suddenly we were not able to provide users not affiliated with that kind of information, which meant that their productivity decreased. They could not really engage in inventions and innovation as they otherwise would be able to do. And that sort of opened my eyes that this is not really a good thing. And that was about the time when sort of the very early adapters of open technologies came around. Of course, Paul Ginsbach started the archive in 1991, but it was basically around year 2000 things began to happen. For instance, the Budapest Open Access Initiative. I think it was 2001 or 2002, we had a conference at the University about scholarly communication, and a participant said, "Yeah, what about those open access journals that are sort of beginning to emerge? Well, couldn't we have a list of those?" Mm-hmm. And then I said, as a host for this of this conference, I said, "Oh, okay, let's look into this." And that's basically how it started. It started with a spreadsheet of 300 journals, mm-hmm. And the rest is history. But probably we're going to discuss the history a little bit. But it was basically an idea, and then we got a minor grant from the Open Society Institute. We developed the service and launched it a few months later, and that was early 2003.
Yeah, I was just talking to Katrina McCollum, the director of Open Science at Hindawi, and we were just talking about how very often we talk about the intersection of like information and the public, and how we want to make things more accessible, not just to researchers but to the public. But when the public learns of the way that we do scholarly communications, they're usually just amazed at the fact that, for example, with open access, funders are paying for research that then is not public. Mm-hmm. But also they're amazed that at this day and age, we still don't have really good metadata and cataloging of our own businesses and our own practices and the content itself. And that the metadata around it is not open as well. Like often the catalogs are closed or the metadata fields are proprietary. And so it's just, we have a lot of cleanup. We have a lot of dirty laundry in the Scalcoms world that if, the general public understood how little we have really done on this, it's amazing to them to think about. There's so much more to do. And the emphasis that you're putting on this idea of, keeping a clean catalog, keeping an open discussion of what quality journal publishing is in the open landscape, it's really touching on that specific touch point of making sure that it's not just the content, not just the narrative and the underlying information that's open, but it's also the ecosystem and the metadata, the information. Mm. It's really impactful.
Mm. Right.
So what additional, what else brought you to the DO? I mean, I know you're the founder of DOAJ, and is there are there other life experiences that just made it so, very apparent to you that this is the project that needed to be created from that initial spreadsheet?
First of all, it has, we have all seen an immense number of sort of projects that has been started, and only a minority of these are actually turned into a sort of continuous service. So that has always been my sort of approach. That we have some good ideas, but they have to be developed in a sustainable way, and so we can actually provide users with a service in the long run. So that's why shortly after we launched the DOAJ, we tried to find sustainable models for securing funding of such a service. And to make even here a long story short, we managed to develop a model for funding. And at some point in time, and that was actually after I left Lund University 10 years later, it became apparent that the DOAJ had developed into such an important thing for research funders and for universities all over the world, that it would not be fair to say that one single university should be responsible for that development, right? So at some point, I think it was 2013, a couple of years after I left Lund University, the community was a little bit worried about the actual capacity of a university to maintain such a service. So with a couple of open access applicants negotiated an agreement with Lund University to get the rights to the database, and we set up a not-for-profit in the UK. And then we managed to really speed up the service and the quality of the service. And nowadays there are 13,000 journals in DOAJ, and we have actually rejected, I think, 30,000 during those almost 20 years DOAJ has been in operation. Mm-hmm. And of course, along the way, we have improved the DOAJ to try to respond to the expectations and the demands from the community to be able to check those journals on very many accounts, so it has been a fantastic journey to sort of see this small thing develop into a service that has become very important for research funders and universities, because they go there to DOAJ to check whether a journal is of a certain quality, and many of those have open access policies and mandates and stuff, and I think DOAJ has been proven very useful for them to go to check for the quality of those journals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and once you have that list, like, the directory, I can see from that original spreadsheet and website, there's just so much potential to offer guidance and information and criteria. And one of the things I know recently that you've been working on, a subject that's very close to the work I do, is this idea of preservation and long-term stewardship of content. Ensuring that open access journals are not just doing open publishing, but they're also ensuring that the long-term stewardship of the content is available and open.
Yeah, and that is
the work that you're doing with Jasper and others.
Sorry?
Maybe you could talk a little bit more about the current work that DOAJ is doing in that field, in that area.
Yeah, I mean, from the very, very early days, it has been a requirement to be listed that the journal has had a preservation arrangement with some recognized organization, and but recently there was a paper published by a Finnish researcher who had tried to check whether a certain number of journals still were available. And it turned out that a fair number of those journals simply vanished from the net, right? And therefore we joined with CLOCK's Internet Archive, Keepers Registry, and PKP to try to find out how could we help all of those journals. Because, if you look at the journals in DOAJ, there are, of course, journals from the biggest publishers, and then we have a long tail of journals that are, for instance, published by a university department or a single journal publisher. And they have a lot of issues to sort of live up to certain standards, not only in terms of preservation, but as well in terms of various technical aspects, as you mentioned earlier, metadata and stuff like that. So here we found, here we saw this paper, and we got together with those organizations to try to help journals get a preservation arrangement. And I think it was more or less a year ago, but we started discussing with those organizations, which are very well known, and today we have actually the first papers has been preserved. And we are still trying to of course, it's early days with this project, but I think it's a good signal to the community that we are really caring, that we would try to help those journals. I mean, a major part of DOAJ's activities are, of course, to evaluate those journals. But to some extent, I think we can say that DOAJ is a huge educational project. I mean, we have lots of communications with primarily smaller publishers, but not only, but primarily smaller publishers, trying to help them live up to standards, right? To inform about licenses, rights issues, preservation, and all this. So it's not only editorial work. It's a huge effort to help build up those journals to certain standards, right?
Yeah, and, pull up like a lot of the smaller publishers to just kind of what many people would consider baseline publishing processes, but actually in many cases it's not even happening at the larger publishers.
That's right. I can tell you we have, for instance, with some of the really big publishers, we have actually helped them make all their language about copyrights and licenses more straight. So we are dealing with the big guys and the long tail all the time. And given that DOAJ has a sort of a global view. I mean, we index journals in 80 languages, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of work there, and luckily we have a very good team, and we have more than 100 volunteers from all over the world who help us evaluate those journals in those very many languages, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We were talking about this before we started about the network that you've created. That using that kind of international web of ambassadors and helpers and volunteers, able to do things in different languages and different regions, but still have a somewhat centralized curation process, right? So it's like a very challenging logistically and also just evolving over time. So it's very impressive how extensive the activity is.
Yeah, and sometimes sort of the community and especially the publishers, it's difficult to explain to them that this takes time. It actually takes time to evaluate a journal, because we are to a certain extent based on the input from all those volunteers who are based all over the world, and they will refer to an editor and a managing editor, and so there's a lot back and forth there, and there's a lot back and forth between our folks and the publisher to help them. So there have been services out there, which are mainly their main approach is to stigmatize publishers, right? We have a completely different approach. We will help those publishers where we can feel that they really have good intentions, but they just need help, right? So yeah.
Mhm. So what it's obviously been a journey of, ramping up and going from kind of a simple structure to something very, global and comprehensive. There's obviously a lot more work to do to help build out the services around DOAJ. What are some of the current plans or challenges that you see the organization facing?
Yeah, I mean, we often discuss, with the emergence of the much more broader open agenda, right? Research data and repositories and all this stuff. Should we try to dive into that? But we have so far decided that we'll try to keep focused on the open access journals because, I mean, there's still a lot to do there. Although I guess many of us could actually dream that the concept of a journal would disappear in the future because there's so many sort of disadvantages with that. But we stick so far. We'll stick to the to focus on the journals, right? And there's still much more that can be done. I mean, in our current strategy, we have. Our ambition is to work more with the big discovery service providers and aggregators to help those very, very small journals to be integrated in those services. So they will pop up in searches in the discovery services next to Wiley and Elsevier and all the other guys. So it has always been our ambition to increase the visibility for those journals, but there's more to be done to be sure that those journals are seamlessly integrated in search engines and library systems and aggregators and discovery service providers. That's one part, and then increasingly we are trying to help the journals to produce better applications to DOAJ to increase the chance that they are actually listed. We reject maybe 50 or 60% of the applications because of issues with the quality and their policies. Now we are engaged in projects in a number of countries trying to do some pre-training of those editors to produce better applications, increasing the chance that or the probability that they will actually be listed. So there's still a lot to do in terms of training and these kind of things to enable us to get better applications.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, just the discussion of that journey of how you've interacted with the community over the years, that shows just the impact that the organization is having on the entire conversation. That the discussions become more and more about less and less about becoming a gatekeeper and more about being an educator and helping people understand the future. The raising of the baseline. The features. It's an amazing contribution. Actually, we are close to time, so I don't know. Are there any parting thoughts or anything? I mean, you said you're close to retirement. Any words of wisdom you have for the community as we end this fireside chat?
Yeah, as I indicated, it has been an amazing journey, and when we started this, I mean, when I began to discuss open access journals with my colleagues at other Swedish or Danish universities and the publishers as well. I mean, they were laughing, right? This will never happen. And now we are here 20 years later, and you cannot find a university president saying that open is stupid, right? And that has been very satisfying, and then it has been very satisfying that that DOAJ has developed in such an important service, and we feel really part of this open movement, and we see that, as I mentioned earlier, open is a much more diverse thing nowadays, but I think there's general agreement now that open access to research and research data and so forth will benefit research immensely, and it benefits students, it benefits innovation and our societies, and that's very satisfying to look back to have been part of that movement and made a tiny contribution. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
much more than, but yeah, I agree with the sentiment that we many times will be self-deprecating as an open or a scholarly communications group, but it's there's so much that has changed even in just the short 20 years or so of from the everything changing to a much more baseline of open and open access being the norm, and the entire ecosystem understanding. And I do think that DOAJ and you have done such an amazing piece of that. It hasn't actually been tiny at all. It's been very substantial. So thank you for all the work you've done, and thank you for joining me for the Fireside Chat today.
Thank you, John. It's been an honor, really, and yeah.
Awesome. So everybody, this has been part of the Open Publishing Festival, and if you want more information about Open Publishing Festival, head on over to openpublishingfest.org. It's a collaborative event run by the COCO Foundation to discuss open topics in the publishing world, run annually, and crowdsourcing events like these, demonstrations and projects and interviews. So please partake either this year or in the coming years. So thank you, everybody. Bye. Okay.